They called it a fairy tale, a life that many dreamt of, but few ever achieved. A young woman, Manjit Basra, had everything one could desire: a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, and a future as bright as the Canadian sunrise. But sometimes, perfection is nothing more than a mask, and behind that mask lies a storm waiting to erupt. Born in India, Manjit was raised with values of ambition, discipline, and heart. Her family migrated to Vancouver, Canada, chasing a better life. And Manjit, fiercely determined and exceptionally intelligent, carved her path early. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, building a family, and living the kind of peaceful life immigrants often imagine. She succeeded, or so she thought. It was during her time in university that she met Muktiar, charming, soft-spoken, and attentive. Their connection was instant. To Manjit, it felt like love at first sight. Muktiar, too, seemed genuinely in love, and soon their bond deepened into marriage, blessed by both families. They had everything: mutual respect, shared goals, and the promise of forever. Manjit believed her life was a dream finally fulfilled. Years passed. In 2003, Manjit gave birth to a daughter, Maya. Their little family was the image of happiness: smiling pictures, warm gatherings, tender moments. But in the shadows, cracks had begun to form. Muktiar, once supportive, began to change. He drank more, stayed out late, grew distant. The warmth in his eyes faded, replaced by cold stares and dismissive silence. Manjit tried to adapt. She reasoned, compromised, and waited, as women are often taught to do. "It's just a phase," friends said. "He'll return to the man you married." But the silence grew louder, the arguments more frequent. Muktiar wanted a wife molded by outdated traditions, obedient, subservient, invisible. Manjit, who had built her life brick by brick, didn't fit that mold. Despite the tension, Manjit remained hopeful. She longed for the love they once shared. And then, a flicker of hope. She was pregnant again. Muktiar, to her surprise, showed affection once more. He seemed caring, attentive. Perhaps the child had softened him, reminded him of the family they were supposed to be. Manjit, too, believed in second chances. Her heart, ever resilient, opened again. But hope can be a cruel illusion. On October 18, 2006, Manjit left for her regular yoga class. She was 4 months pregnant. She never came back. At first, no one panicked. Manjit had, on rare occasions, taken short breaks after fights, staying at a friend's or checking into a hotel just to clear her mind. But this time was different. She hadn't taken her daughter with her. She hadn't told anyone. And unlike before, she didn't return by morning. 26 hours later, Muktiar filed a missing person report. He called Manjit's family, sounding confused and concerned. He told them he had to go to work, Maya had school, and he had no idea where Manjit could be. The family was deeply worried, but something felt off. Manjit would never leave Maya behind. Not like this. The community rallied. The media picked up the story. Muktiar appeared devastated in interviews, pleading for her return. His eyes looked tired, heavy with grief. And yet, something didn't sit right. Behind his sorrow, there was stillness, a kind of hollow detachment that some could feel but not explain. Days passed with no answers. Then, on October 23rd, the nightmare became real. On the shores of South Delta, a burned body was discovered. DNA confirmed what her family feared. It was Manjit. Her body charred, left in a desolate area, discarded like a secret too shameful to speak aloud. But she hadn't died from fire. The autopsy revealed she was strangled to death. This revelation sent shockwaves through the community. Who could do this? Who would kill a pregnant woman, and why? Manjit had no enemies. She was loved, respected. Her life was centered around her students, her family, her home. None of it made sense. The police began their investigation with the usual suspects: family, friends, colleagues. Everyone was questioned. Everyone except Muktiar seemed genuinely broken. Still, there was no proof, no direct motive. Suspicion rose, but the evidence was elusive. One thread emerged. Manjit had been in contact with an old college friend, Tony. According to Muktiar, the two had grown unusually close. Late-night phone calls, occasional dinners. Muktiar suggested an affair. The police followed the lead. Tony was interrogated, subjected to a polygraph. He passed. Calm, cooperative, honest. He and Manjit were simply friends, nothing more. The narrative Muktiar painted began to blur, and slowly the spotlight turned back on him. Yet Muktiar was careful, too careful. No obvious mistakes, no confessions, and those around him still believed he was innocent. Even the police hesitated. The grief he displayed, the helplessness he conveyed, it was convincing. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Then came the first crack. Surveillance footage showed Muktiar purchasing a lighter and old newspapers from a gas station near his home, hours before Manjit's body was found burned. Why would a grieving husband need such items that night? The story was unraveling, and as investigators re-examined every detail, they discovered more lies about where Manjit's yoga class actually was, about the location of her abandoned car, about the phone she had with her. The illusion of the perfect husband was beginning to collapse. But how far was Muktiar willing to go to hide the truth? And what could make a man kill the woman he once claimed to love, the mother of his children, with such cold calculation? It should have ended with mourning. A family shattered, a daughter orphaned, a community grieving the senseless death of a beloved mother and teacher. But the truth, like a corpse, never stays buried for long. And in Manjit's case, it was clawing its way to the surface, piece by chilling piece. With growing suspicion, the police turned their attention back to Muktiar Panghali, the grieving husband whose grief now felt like a carefully rehearsed script. His interviews, once seen as raw and emotional, began to appear practiced. There were cracks in his words, inconsistencies in his timeline. The man who once evoked sympathy was now exuding shadows. The location of Manjit's yoga class, a simple detail, became a fatal flaw in Muktiar's narrative. He had told investigators she attended classes in a nearby area, but the truth was far different. The class was held 25 kilometers away, in the exact opposite direction of where her car was found. A glaring lie. Why would a man claiming to help the investigation fabricate something so basic? Unless he needed the lie to protect something else. The car, Manjit's vehicle, was untouched. No signs of forced entry, no struggle. Whoever left it there had keys, had access. The seat was pushed back, far too much for Manjit, who was short and visibly pregnant. Only someone tall, like Muktiar, could have driven it last. The circumstantial evidence was growing louder. Muktiar was no longer a grieving widower. He was a suspect. Yet suspicion alone means nothing in court. The police needed more, and they were about to find it. They began tracing phone records. One discovery chilled them. After Manjit disappeared, her cell phone wasn't missing. It was active, and it was with Muktiar. He had removed her SIM card and inserted his own. His excuse: he was trying to call her contacts. But why insert your SIM into a dead woman's phone? Why lie about never seeing her after yoga class, if he clearly had? The evidence once scattered and circumstantial, was beginning to align like dominoes. Then came the tipping point. A surveillance tape, pulled from a local gas station near Muktiar's home, showed him purchasing a newspaper and a lighter late at night, hours before Manjit's burned body was discovered. What use would a man have for fire alone after his pregnant wife had gone missing? This was no longer coincidence. It was orchestration. On March 12, 2007, nearly 5 months after Manjit's death, Muktiar Panghali was arrested for her murder. At first, he denied everything, claimed innocence, played the grieving father. But the truth, once it begins to bleed, cannot be bandaged. The interrogation tore through his lies, and at last the mask fell. Muktiar confessed. He had strangled Manjit in their home, in a fit of rage or resentment, or perhaps simply because she had dared to stand against him. Then he burned her body near the water, hoping the flames would devour the evidence, hoping the tide would erase his sins. But why? The motive, disturbingly, wasn't money. It wasn't jealousy. It was hatred, pure, festering, unapologetic. Muktiar resented Manjit for confronting his behavior, for removing his brother Sukhvinder, a fellow drunk, from their home, for challenging his ego. He didn't want a partner. He wanted control. And when Manjit no longer bowed to that control, she became expendable. This, then, is the man he truly was. To the world, he was a respected teacher, a loving father, a husband mourning an unimaginable loss. Behind closed doors, he was a man unraveling, his bitterness masked by politeness, his violence cloaked in silence. His love was conditional, his affection performative. And when Manjit stopped being the woman he could dominate, he silenced her forever. The community, once sympathetic to Muktiar, recoiled in horror. The man they'd pitied, whom they had comforted, had been the executioner all along. Manjit's family was devastated, not just by the loss, but by the betrayal. Her own husband, the father of her child. The man who had promised forever had stolen everything. But justice, in its slow, methodical way, arrived. In November 2010, after years of investigation, court proceedings, and media trials, Muktiar Panghali was found guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence, life in prison, with no parole for 15 years. A pitiful price for 2 stolen lives, Manjit and the unborn child she would never get to hold. Yet, justice can never resurrect the dead. It can only imprison the guilty. With the conviction behind them, Manjit's family fought one final battle for Maya, her daughter. A child who had watched her father grieve on television, never knowing he was the one who had made her mother disappear. Manjit's sister, Jasmine, took custody of Maya, shielding her from the press, the pain, and the poison of her father's legacy. Years later, Jasmine would admit something chilling in an interview, that seeing Muktiar in court made her sick, that every glance at his face brought back the sound of her sister's strangled breath, the image of her burned body, the cries that would never again be heard. The man who had stood beside them in grief had always been the storm. But perhaps the most haunting thought of all was this: how many others are there? How many women, like Manjit, believe they're building a life with someone who loves them, only to find out too late that the love was never real, only possession disguised as affection? What drives a man to murder not just his wife, but the very idea of family, love, and legacy? And so, as the curtain falls on this chapter of the story, the question remains: is evil always visible? Or is it often hiding in plain sight, wearing the face we trust the most? The verdict was read aloud in a quiet courtroom, but its echo was deafening. Guilty. With that word, Muktiar Panghali, once a respected teacher, a loving husband in the eyes of many, was stripped of his lies. Yet no cell, no sentence, no years behind bars could undo what he had done. The damage had already seeped into the bones of everyone left behind. Manjit was gone, her unborn child silenced before ever taking its first breath. Her daughter Maya left with a name that would haunt her forever, not because of her mother, but because of the man whose blood still ran through her veins. And this, truly, was the cruelest legacy Muktiar left behind. Not just a body burned beyond recognition, but a family broken beyond repair. In the aftermath of his conviction, the media frenzy reignited. What had initially been a sympathetic story of a grieving husband searching for his pregnant wife had now become a cautionary tale, a national horror. Reporters dug through every detail. Photos of Manjit's smiling face were plastered across headlines, always paired with courtroom sketches of Muktiar. Cold, expressionless, calculated. The man who had wept on camera for the cameras alone. Manjit Basra, Manjit's sister, emerged as the quiet warrior of this tragedy. She took in Maya, not just as an aunt, but as a mother, protector, and guardian of a childhood destroyed. During interviews, her voice never trembled, but her eyes always held something unspeakable. Pain, rage, and that soul-wrenching question no one could answer. Why didn't we see this coming? Because that's the unbearable truth, isn't it? Muktiar didn't murder in a fit of madness. He didn't snap. He plotted. He waited. He chose. And yet everyone missed the signs. The friends who dismissed Manjit's early cries for help. The family members who mistook control for care. The society that told her to have patience, to keep trying, to forgive and forget. How many women are told to endure abuse quietly because every marriage has its problems? Muktiar wasn't a monster in the attic. He was the man next door, the colleague in the staff room, the father helping with school pickup. He was ordinary. That's what made him dangerous. And for Maya, the child who once played at his feet, the truth will be a poison that drips slowly over a lifetime. Jasmine tried and continues to try to shield her from the full horror. But the world does not allow children to forget the names that haunt their bloodline. Eventually, she will know. Eventually, she will remember. What, then, will justice mean to her? By 2011, the courts had spoken. Muktiar was sentenced to life in prison, with no eligibility for parole for 15 years. But what is that to a woman murdered in her 4th month of pregnancy? What is that to a child growing up without her mother? Justice, when it comes too late, is not justice. It is retribution masquerading as morality. Still, the legal system had done its job. It had exposed the murderer. But it had not solved the root of the problem: the entitlement, the control, the misogyny that festers beneath the surface of too many homes, hidden behind closed doors and hollow smiles. In the years that followed, Manjit's story became more than a case file. It became a symbol of the thousands of women silenced before their time, whose pleas are ignored until they vanish. Candlelight vigils were held. Domestic abuse hotlines were funded in her name. Her face became a warning: don't wait until it's too late. But let us not romanticize her death. She wasn't a martyr. She didn't die to teach us a lesson. She died because a man chose to kill her. And the most terrifying part: if he hadn't made a few clumsy mistakes, the location lie, the gas station footage, the cell phone, he would have gotten away with it. he would have raised Maya alone, played the grieving husband for decades, perhaps even remarried, buried the truth so deep that no one would ever know what he did. You see, it's not the monster under the bed that kills. It's the one who tucks you in at night. And so we end where we began, with a perfect life. A dream chased across oceans, shattered by the one who promised to protect it. Manjit did everything right. She was strong, she planned, she loved. And still, it was not enough. Her story ends in ashes. But the questions she leaves behind are embers still glowing in the minds of all who hear it. How many more Manjits must there be before we learn to listen, before we learn to see? And now I leave you, not with closure, but with a question you must answer. If someone you love were hiding their pain behind a smile, would you recognize the scream beneath the silence?